Hello and welcome to Hope Unabridged. I'm Kasey Brennan.
I'm Angie Elkins.
And today we're going to sit down with Morgan Harper Nichols and have a conversation on finding hope in seasons of doubt. And I can't think of a better person to talk about that. Her words, she is a poet, an author, a musician, just all around treasure keeper of words, really, to me.
Yeah, that's good.
And her words have really carried me through some dark times. So I'm excited.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's ever a time we need some hope and some strong words, it's now.
It is. It is indeed.
For sure.
So thank you for being here, Morgan. We're so excited.
Yes, so excited.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you. So firstly, I just want to say that your words, they have spoken to me, my friends. We share them with one another probably daily. And it's almost like the Holy Spirit just uses, it's like they're speaking right to me. And I know that you're right. You write for many people that write in their hurts and pains, and you turn that into something beautiful. But every time it feels so personal to me, and I know that I am not alone in that. So thank you, and thank you for using that gift. It's a beautiful thing. But can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yes, well, thank you so much. That's so encouraging. I do share a lot, but at the same time, I'm at home a lot. I don't hear a lot of the stories and the reactions. So yeah, that means a lot to hear. Well, I grew up in a very artistic environment. I was homeschooled, and my mom really encouraged my sister and I to create something new every day. And I always like to share that part because I make a lot of artwork, and I do think I got it at a young age. It's just like, hey, you're allowed to do that. And not a lot of people have that. And not a lot of people have their creativity, encouraged and nurtured at a young age. So I would say that's been a huge blessing. And then also my parents were in ministry, and they were pastors of a very small church in Georgia where I grew up. And from a young age, I always sort of lived with this tension of like, I love seeing how my parents would connect with community and connect with others, but I was more introverted. And I also have a speech impediment and dyslexia. And those obviously make it challenging to communicate. So I always really struggled because it was like, I felt like this sort of call within, like I felt God calling me from within to connect with others, but I just seemed to not be able to figure out how. It was like, okay, I don't really feel equipped or capable or have the ability to speak, or I felt like I didn't have like a big enough personality, or, just from a young age, I would just kind of tell myself these things, and I really started to doubt myself. And for pretty much from childhood up to age 25, I know that's a huge jump, but for that first quarter of my life, it was just sort of this ebb and flow of going back and forth between like, okay, maybe I can be an artist, maybe I could be a musician, maybe I could be a fiction writer, maybe I'll be a photographer, just going through all of these different transitions. Trying to make it work. And it just got increasingly more difficult because, as anybody knows, when you grow up, you have bills to pay. And I was really struggling because my husband and I, we met in college. And then after graduating, we both ended up doing just lots of different freelance work, and we worked a lot in the music industry. And it was just kind of a struggle because it was like, okay, even when I'm doing creative things, like it all feels like a struggle. It's like, one, we're still living paycheck to paycheck. And two, I'm exhausted all the time. And I was just sort of like, okay, I can be, broke or exhausted, but both of those combined is just, it's kind of avalanche. So I kind of hit a point in my mid-20s where I was like, I don't know if I can keep this up forever, and I just feel like my prayer at that time just had like a big question mark on it of just like, maybe am I supposed to give up? It's this whole sort of artistic call, this sort of like creative energy that I just feel like exploding out of me. Like maybe that's just like a dream. Maybe that's just something I need to just let go. And on one night in November of 2016, I was 26, and I feel like that was just the night where all of those doubts just started to kind of tumble down on me. And I broke down and just started crying for the first time in a very long time. And I felt like a failure. I felt like I had let my family down. I had let down everybody who supported me. I was just like, oh, I guess, because I mean, we live in a world where it's like, if you're not like viral and successful by age 21, like people legitimately think that means it's over for them, which is so absurd. But I was also one of those people who was comparing myself to the 15-year-old prodigies, to the people who win Grammys at 18. I was comparing myself to all of those people, thinking, okay, well, clearly I failed, clearly this isn't what God has called me to do. And all of that just kind of hit me at once. And then some kind of way, on the end of those tears, it just turned into a poem. And I opened my journal and I just wrote this poem. And the first part of the poem says, when you start to feel like things should have been better this year, remember the mountains and valleys that brought you here. And I just wrote these words, and now I know, like when I go back and read that poem, I still have that original journal. I know now that was God speaking to me through me, using my own creative ability to tell me something that I needed to hear. But in the moment, it didn't feel that way. In the moment, I was like, okay, that sounds nice, but I'm not sure if I really believe it. I'm not sure if that even, okay, sure, it sounds like a positive thing, but whatever, this is me giving up. So that was in November of 2016. And then the following January, I ended up finding out, I had shared the poem on Pinterest and forgot about it. And then I ended up finding out that following January that it had been repenned over 100,000 times.
Wow.
And then it started showing up. It started showing up on Instagram, and people that I knew were messaging me like, hey, I'm seeing this poem go around that has your name on it. Did you write a poem? And I have no idea how people found it. Wow. And I have no idea where it took off, how it took off, how it happened. And that ended up becoming sort of like a wake-up call to what ended up happening was like people started to send me DMs and Instagram DMs and saying like, hey, this poem really meant a lot to me, and here's why. They were telling me stories that were just people who had been through things far worse than anything I had been through. What the poem was actually about was just like a 26-year-old writing about a career failure. But there were people who were messaging me who had experienced far more intense tragedy and trauma and grief in their lives. And it just became such a moment of humility, of being humbled and realizing like, okay, we really are vessels. Like, it's not about like how I can spin this to be like this deep thing. I don't know. I just have to show up to the page, even if I'm struggling to believe the words that I'm writing, just write it. And then it's going to connect with who it's meant to connect with. And I started, for the first time in my life, I started to create. And I didn't have those voices in my head of like, okay, but what if it's not successful? Is this, are these lyrics to a hit song? I didn't have any of that in my mind. I was just thinking like, this 16-year-old girl just messaged me, and the least I can do is just write for her. The least I can do is respond to her. Everybody else, all of the industry people that I feel like I have to impress, or I wasn't worried about them. And that's kind of how for the first time, I felt like I was onto something in the sense of like, this is different. Like suddenly now that I've broken it down and I've just made it about this one person right now who sent me their story, who sent me their message, this feels like something I could do. So in 2017, I just posted on my Instagram story, hi, I will write for you. Send me your story. I'll keep your story private. Just respond. to your story with art and poetry. And that's just sort of has been how I got here. And it was really interesting because the responses that were happening with that it was totally new. I had never received, felt so like connected to strangers on the internet. And it really unlocked something for me. And I still have moments of doubt and frustration with myself and comparing myself. But me and my husband were just having a whole conversation about that this morning. We're talking because since quarantine, the never ending quarantine of 2020, we've been watching a lot of YouTube. And we were talking about, hey, we really need to even some of the positive content that we watch on YouTube, we're comparing ourselves to other people. And I was like, we have to be mindful of that. And maybe we need to unsubscribe from some people for a little while if we're comparing ourselves to them. So it's definitely something that I still work through. But what brings me back is just that one-on-one connection and just reminding myself that it's through that one-on-one, it's through that very personal connection that I'm reminded of something so much bigger than me. So,
I love that.
So,
there's
so good.
Such a connection to our vulnerability. And I think you just breathe that onto, that poem that you were just talking about, that spoke to me probably in one of my darkest moments. And I was probably one of those people that shared it on Pinterest, to be honest with you. But
thank you.
I had just birthed my second child, and he learned he had special needs, and I didn't know what they were. We still don't know. It's still undiagnosed at this point, but it took me through a deep grief. And I remember, I think I saw it on Pinterest or Instagram, and it just lifted me up. I was like, yeah, I have been through those valleys, and it meant so much to me. And and that's, I think, being vulnerable and sharing your story and sharing that grief and putting it on paper, that is, God is using you in a really big way. You wrote a song recently and posted it called One Breath at a Time. And it completely wrecked me. That raw vulnerability of singing through the pain and joy, that's such a gift. Can you share a little bit about that song?
Yes. So I started writing that song. I feel like it was before I had my son. I don't know when I started it. It was a while back, and it takes me forever to write songs. Poetry and art is the exact opposite. I just
totally feel you.
For some reason, music, it is like it's a process.
Yeah.
And I started it, and I just didn't know where it fit. And then it was just this summer, I was just feeling so much grief that is just summing up 2020 and a lot of things that were just a lot of unrest that was going on in the country at that time, a lot of racial reconciliation that just needs happening, just feeling the full weight of that. And also at the same time, just feeling like I don't know what to say. It's weird to be a writer or an artist or somebody who's okay, yes, you're supposed to give language and color and texture to all these big things. But it's we're also human beings, and we're also people were messaging well, what are you going to say? I'm I'm completely stumped. I'm also grieved. I'm also angry. I'm also confused. I'm also tired. I'm exhausted. And just something in me just started to think about my childhood and just think about so many times, even just watching my parents go visit people in the hospital and go visit the shut-in, and just thinking about there's so many of the moments that I remember was when we were joining together in song. And I just find that to be so powerful because songs are not, we don't necessarily listen to songs for okay, I just need the answer. What's the answer? We may read a book with that mindset. We may listen to a sermon with that mindset, but when it the songs, it's sort of like we're sharing collectively in this feeling, even just from like the Christian tradition standpoint, even when you think about the Psalms themselves, they're just like, they're meant to be spoken and sung together. And there's something so like beautifully mysterious about that to me. Cause it's like, for some reason, when we're singing together, it's okay to just like share in that sorrow. And sometimes we just have to do. Yeah. So that song was really about just like, okay, it's not about me having the answers. It's about me acknowledging the sorrow that I have and recognizing that other people have this sorrow too. Yeah. And even if they don't have that sorrow, to witness another human being in grief, like that does something to you. And what I find is that like what's so powerful about that to me is that even though it's sorrow, when you set it to music, that's kind of where the joy comes in.
Yeah. Yes.
Where that overlap happens, where suddenly, like you said, there's that joy and sorrow there together. And we're not just sitting in that moment. We're not like, okay, who did it? Okay, who, what's wrong here? Like, how can we fix it? We're like, let's just share in that together. Yeah. Yes, there are all these questions. Yes, there's this righteous anger, this frustration. And at the same time, there's this joy. And there's something about like the actual chords of a piano, of a guitar, that can really remind you of that. So I'm not sure that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense.
Trying to explain music. And
it's connected. Yeah. It's connected, I think, to the way that God has made, one of the ways God's made us in his image is to create. And so I think art is a tool that he's given us to be able to cope really with this world that we live in. I think it's healing. So whether it's music or poetry or a painted work or whatever it is, it's so cool, even to me, to see the beauty that has come out of the ashes of 2020. Just all of the artistic creativity, poetry, music, all of it that really you feel like God gave us as a gift to say, look, I got you. I'm going to get you through this. It's going to be okay. So I would love to know a little bit about your process. Like when you're creating, do you, I know a lot of people just get inspired and they just have to sit down and get it out, write it out. And then others are just like, okay, it's time for me to sit at my desk and write something. Lord, send me some words, So how does it happen for you?
I start with art first, because what I found is that for some reason, when I'm doing something that's not focused on like, okay, what are the words? What's the meaning of it? How does it make sense? When I'm just focusing on the colors and shapes, it kind of takes me back to that childlike place where I'm not so worried about like, when are the words going to come? How are they going to come? So what I do is like, I take my artwork digitally. I use an iPad and I just sit there, and I love that because I'm not even worried about like, am I wasting too much yellow paint? Am I?
Sure.
Did I just get my shirt dirty? Like all I have to worry about is charge the Apple Pencil and charge the iPad. That's it. That's all I have to worry about.
The beauty of technology.
Yeah, I feel like that is one of my favorite things about technology. And if I mess up and I really don't like what I did, like I didn't waste an actual piece of paper. Like I can press undo. So, I love that. That's where I start. And then typically when I'm doing that, I'm either listening to an audiobook or a podcast or mostly those two, audiobooks, podcasts, sometimes music. And I just let myself just like be poured into in a way. I think that's so important for anyone making things or serving people in any capacity. It's like we kind of forget to be poured into, and that's even hard right now because it's just community has just changed for so many of us, and we're not seeing people. Many of us just aren't seeing people like they used to. At least that's how it's been for me. And like I was just listening today in this. I was listening to an audiobook, poet John O'Donohue, and it's a poet about like beauty and how to see God in the sense of like like one of the quotes from the book he says in there are just like one of the most powerful images we have of God is of creator. That's like a thing of Genesis. Like God created the earth, and just listening to that, it just helps me as I'm just sitting there painting. The second I get ready to question myself, like, oh, I've done this color before, or I've done this style before. It's like, that's not why you're doing this. Like, just create. You would make. And then from that, I typically start to kind of feel the poetry a little bit. And, I might hop on Instagram or something and I might share some of the art, and then people will respond. And then the poetry kind of comes through there. So the poetry a lot of times comes through the conversation that the art sparked, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is it easier for you to write somebody else's grief or your own?
That's such a good question. It's way easier to write about someone else. Not that it's easy to write about grief, but it's harder to look within. However, over and over again, I find that even when I'm writing for someone whose story is completely different than mine, like it's teaching me something too. Like it is absolutely teaching me something. And there are many times where I've gone back and read things that I wrote and I was like, oh, that was for me. That was for me. But it is definitely easier to kind of like look at, how I can help someone else find the language. And so that's why I've been taking that time, especially this year, to really make sure that I'm being poured into, even if it's nothing more than audio, just to remind myself of like, hey, like there's stuff inside of me that I need language for in my own life. And it's take that time. So
that's good.
How does your art anchor your spiritual practice?
Yes, I would say that it's, I love that you use the word anchor because it does feel very foundational. I feel very connected to God when I'm making art. It feels like prayer to me. Like one of the biggest criticisms I get from my work sometimes, some people will say like, oh, why didn't you put God in that poem? Or why didn't you say that? And then my response is always like, this is God speaking to me. So if God's speaking to me, then maybe the word God might not be in it. So it's like, if I'm writing about like endless, boundless peace, I was like, for me, that is God speaking to me about endless peace. And typically when I give that answer, they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I think a lot of times, we think about, God in the sense of like, okay, how can I sort of like petition to God and like, God help me with this, that is absolutely a part of it. And there's also, which, we hear in the words of Jesus, which is like, be still, like, like just be still and like, listen. And we don't always have to know, we don't always have to have words. So for me, art is how I get into the posture of listening. Like there are other ways, but I feel like that is the main one for me.
And your book has been, I picked that up. Honestly, like that's like my little hope nugget. Like I'll just pick it up and read it. And it is just, it's so beautiful. And it's just filled with so much hope. It really is.
So that's so encouraging. Thank you.
It's wonderful. Are you going to write another one? I hope so.
I am. Yes. I have some things in the works. So they'll be coming super soon.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one of the last questions we ask all of our guests is, where are you personally finding hope these days?
I mentioned the audiobook that I was listening to earlier, and I feel like I've been really clearly have been finding a sense of hope. Like in reading, I feel like I had stopped reading for a while because just life is busy and there's so much going on. And I've been finding a lot of hope in that because I read I like to read a lot of books that I don't even try to do this. It just ends up happening. A lot of people who are no longer with us,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of older writers. And what I find in that, just like, it's amazing how often, like, I'm reading a lot of poetry, just like how a lot of poems just really speak to this time, even though this person never knew this time. Like, they never lived through 2020, and yet these poems are more relevant than ever. And that just gives me a lot of hope, because it's like, it's easy to feel sometimes when you're working that, you're just wondering, like, is my work meaningful? Like, does it have purpose? Does it have value? And I just have to remind myself that, oh, wait a second, like, I'm reading authors, I'm engaging with artwork of people who they never lived to see the impact of their work. One of this one artist that I've just been kind of studying and reading, her name's Hilma Clint, and she's like an early abstract artist. And she was largely unknown because she was just there's not a lot of women in our art history. They're kind of just now starting to research and find lots of women who are doing cool things along the way. And she was like the original abstract artist, and her work is just now being shown. And they did an exhibit with her work in Sweden, and people just, where she was from, and people were just weeping. They were crying. They were on their knees just crying at how beautiful it was. And I was like, she never lived to see this. I think she died sometime around World War II. Like, she never lived to see the impact of work. And here I am talking about it, and, via technology that she didn't even know about. It's like, who am I to sit here and worry about Instagram likes? Like, who am I to sit here and worry about, like, every little thing I do? Like, does this have impact? It's like, some of the people whose work we just get chills reading it. They never even lived to see that. So that gives me a lot of hope of just remembering that, okay, what I'm doing, it is a part of something so much greater than me. And I might see flickers of how that plays out, in this life. But, maybe some of this stuff, it will grow after, after, and just, learning how to find gratitude for that. So that's such a long answer.
Morgan, you are one of my favorite follows on Instagram. So I know our viewers are wondering, like, how to connect with you. And I just want to encourage everybody watching, Morgan Harper Nichols on Instagram. You will love it. So definitely go there and check it out.
Yes. And thank you so much. It's been awesome to hear your heart, and it's meant a lot to me. So I thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. It was so nice to meet you all.
Yes, nice meeting you too.
Enjoyed.
Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you, if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
And if you're listening and you would like to see the filmed version of the show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on our YouTube channel and our app.
We hope that something you've heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share this show with those you love. Just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.